All right, we are back. Episode number 8 with Golden Anderson, head football coach and athletic director at Carmel High School. Golden, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me. In this short span, I've become a big fan of your podcast, so good job.
Well, we're just getting started, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on. I really think the listeners will be able to glean some things from your experience. So, you know what? Why don't you just take us through your background as a coach? How did you end up coaching? How did you land your first job? Any subsequent jobs? What was the process for that? And how did you get where you are today?
Yeah, I think it started off like I think a lot of people do, Justin. You play a sport you love. I was somebody that was in a transition period in my college career of being back home between schools and having some dead time. And I know Craig Johnson, who was the coach here, who I'd known since I was in youth football, said, "Hey, while you're here, why don't you come help out? Put you down on the JVs. You can volunteer." And I thought this was awesome. This is great. I come help out. And quickly realized, hey, just from my experience playing 2 years in college, I feel like I learned a lot that I didn't know in high school. And man, some of these little nuggets I could give to some of these guys would be really helpful. And that was where you really saw, the return on your investment when you put some work in and you have some ideas that are helpful, how the kids responded to it. Great age group to work with, a lot of fun. And I realized like, hey, I could see myself doing this, but of course to do that, you're looking at being in a specific profession. It's hard to have an off-campus job that aligns with coaching. And I wasn't going to base my whole career on my off-campus job aligned with coaching. And I thought, hey, this is something I might want to do one day. And of course I go back off to college and finish up and kind of realize, maybe teaching and being with that age group, that high school age group would be a lot of fun. And so came back after graduating college in 2003 and contacted Coach Johnson and just said, hey, I graduated college. I'm back in the area. I'm going to be getting a teaching credential. If you need any help, let me know. And it kind of a funny story. I remember him saying, well, we start spring football today. And, back in the days when you graduate college in like middle of May. Mm-hmm. And he said, we're starting spring football today. And I said, great. Do you want me to come out there? And he said, I don't know how many guys will be there. Like, I don't know if we'll have enough guys to even have it. And I said, okay. And we showed up. There was 10 or 12 guys. And he said, yeah, I want to have you coach on the JVs this year. I said, sure. And so I helped Mark Spindler, who's been our longtime JV coach here. And I remember one of the first couple of days we were together, Coach Spindler said, all right, you're gonna run the offense. You're going to call the plays. And I remember thinking, like, I don't even know what the offense we have. What are we doing? Like, what's everything called? And so I remember at the time meeting with Coach Johnson and just saying, hey, what do you want me to do? And this has always stuck with me, and it kind of does to this day. It resonates with me where Coach Johnson said, I really appreciate you even asking. Mm-hmm. And to me was, well, I wouldn't know what to do if I didn't ask. And his response to me was kind of like, you would be surprised with how many people would just make something up on their own and do something that they want to do and go. Mm-hmm. And so I learned as much as I could from Coach Johnson in the crash course, wanted to make sure that we were totally aligned with what he was doing. We coached the season, and the next season after that was the 2004 season. And he had me asked if I wanted to come be an assistant on the varsity, help out with the quarterbacks. And I said, sure, that'd be great. And he also said right before the season that as a head coach, I'm going to go up in the booth and I'm going to coach from up there because I feel like I can remove all my emotion. I can just play call. And I want you to signal in all the plays. And so I remember being extremely overwhelmed as a 23-year-old being told this. And looking back now, what it did for me was a crash course on managing the sideline and trying to do my best to manage my emotions. Mm-hmm. And having an idea of what's going on in the game and why are we doing things, because I'm being able to translate what he's seen up there and communicate it to the kids, mm-hmm. deal with officials, mm-hmm. Deal with the fires that go on the sidelines, whether you have an injury and communicating that back up to the booth, and also having to get the play in my head, not that I'm selecting it, he's selecting it, and then I'm having to translate that with a hand signal and get it out so that we beat the play clock and we get the play going. And then, of course, we evolved into a no huddle, which made everything go even faster. Mm-hmm. So I spent 5 seasons doing that. I was hired after 2 seasons as the athletic director here, which gave me a lot of unique perspective that I didn't have before, mm-hmm. as far as the overall, our small little niche in the greater good of Carmel High sports. Mm-hmm. Where as a player, all that existed for me was the sports that I played. Right. And I kind of vaguely remember going to other sports, where now realizing all the logistics and how many other good things were going on our campus, and how many people were working just as hard or harder and how many programs were being overlooked and maybe not in the newspaper, but having kids that were making the same sacrifices and putting the same work in, and coaches being just as diligent and detailed. So I spent 2 years doing that, and then Coach Johnson announced that he was gonna retire.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him sitting me down in his office saying that, and it was a surprise. I mean, I think people on the outside always thought like he was just going to leave like as soon as his sons graduated, but we never got that just working with him.
Mm-hmm.
And when he told me that, I was surprised, because this has been like the only head coach I'd worked for, the person that from an offensive standpoint and a way to attack a defense and things like that, somebody that's the only person I was always working with in those regards. And then said, hey, I'd love it. I think you'd be a great fit. I'm gonna let the school know, like, I think you should do it. And so, I put in my application and I interviewed with our principal. And obviously in the world of public education, if you're a certificated employee and you're a teacher, you got an inside track to at least be interviewed and be considered.
Right.
And I was our only internal applicant and got hired at that point. And, my first season was in 2009, and I've been kind of going through that ever since. So it was kind of a unique, people have asked, well, how did you get, this job versus another job? I'd coached baseball at Seaside High under Randall Bispo when he worked there.
Mm-hmm.
But once I got hired as the AD here, I kind of stopped doing stuff other places.
Mm-hmm.
But working with other coaches, mentors of mine like Randall Bispo, and playing for a guy like Mike Kelly, working with Craig Johnston, and playing for some great coaches in college, I felt like I had a lot of different perspectives. I didn't always grow up in Carmel, so I grew up in the Monterey Seaside area, and so I always felt like I had a different perspective on the Monterey Peninsula. I've been other places, went to basic public school all my life, but 2 years, and saw some things that worked other places, some things that didn't work, and quickly realized everywhere is unique, and it doesn't work the same everywhere. And I needed to find what's going to work in the dynamic that we have, and go from there. And that's kind of what my goal has been since we've been here, from how we've structured our coaching staff. When I first took over, I just remember saying, like, I just don't want a team of alumni being the coaches. I'm not looking to get the gang back together and just coach. So I was trying to find people that was every ethnicity, from every background, every age group, and try to combine that, because I thought that's the best way for kids to try to identify with an adult, is the more eclectic that group is, we have a chance to kind of meet the needs of all of our students that are on our team. And we just, I've been kind of being our AD and coaching the football team since 2009. So, and here I am on the podcast.
Well, so many places we can go with that. And I think it's a perfect segue, because you, for lack of a better word, we're at the right place at the right time for two opportunities, the athletic director job and the football job. And, going into those, you had some experience, with football, but what did you realize as you got into that job and as you got into the AD job? I think there's two different ways you can tackle this. What you realize that you didn't know and that you needed to figure out quickly?
Well, I'll start with the AD point. I didn't know anything about it. That was my first full-time teaching job. And, Carl Palestrini, who we all know and love, has been a longtime principal here and is a board member here. He had enough faith in me with our superintendent, Marvin Biasotti, to hire me out of college and say, we're going to give you part-time social studies position, a part-time athletic director position. And I remember telling Carl, I said, Carl, I'm not sure about this. I've been involved in sports. I love sports, but I don't know, where do I start? And we joke about it now, but one of the first things he ever said was, don't worry about it. If you're terrible at it, we'll just fire you and find somebody else and you can just teach. And I don't remember that being like the biggest vote of confidence, but in a weird way, it also gave me some perspective of like, that's his way of saying you can fail. It's like, It's all right to fail. Like, we all don't know this stuff, and make the most out of it and learn what you can and go from there. So I really didn't know square one. I had one meeting with our previous athletic director, and he showed me how to sign up and organize the officials, how to go on a website and organize the officials. And so it was really, and what it really went back to me is I always pride myself on being pretty organized, but it was really about building relationships with the other adults on our campus, and building relationships with kids, and building relationships with the coaches, and trying to find the coaches that are going to align with the philosophical views that we have at our school. And unfortunately and fortunately, athletics is a very emotional thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time in my life I had been involved when I wasn't involved in a scenario where the emotions kind of were put onto my plate, or directed towards me, positive and negative.
Mm-hmm.
Usually as a player or a coach, like if you directly influenced a player, did something or made a mistake or did something good, like you wear the bad stuff and you accept the good stuff as well.
Right.
So that was kind of a thing that I kind of had to get used to. And really feeling that I never understood before I was in this role as an athletic director is in my mind how I felt about how programs were versus how sometimes programs felt they were perceived, which were two different things, and I really carried that with me from the beginning. Is they don't really experience, your intentions, they really experience how the behavior is and how they feel. So your intention was always to make everyone feel the same and everyone feel like they're valued and things like that. But it really came back, and I've always reflected over my career, like how can I do a better job of doing that for the teams? Because kids choose what sports they go play. The media chooses which sports are on TV. A lot of programs feel like they're not viewed the same, and they want to be viewed the same. They don't need more or need less. They just want to feel like they're on equal footing with everyone else. And so that was something that I really had to learn to make people feel that way. And we make mistakes all the time, or we don't do a good job of that sometimes. And that's really been a mission of mine the last half of my career that I've been here, is to do that for those programs, which is something I had no idea about when I started.
Right.
I was kind of in my lane of being a coach for my sport, or being a player in my sport, or being my role in my family or my role in my profession, where I realized like how many other people were influenced in that position. So that's kind of what I didn't know then, versus when I took over as head coach, I had the inside knowledge, the insider training ability of being there. I've been there and seen what had worked. I'd been there to see what I wanted to enhance. I'd been there to see what I wanted to add. I had and relationships with the players. As as the assistant coach is always, we make the joke when you're driving the vans to an event, the assistant coach's van is really crowded.
Yep.
The head coach van, it's not as many guys in it. And you kind of realize that when you took over, was you were immediately a fresh face, you're immediately somebody that they'd identified with, but it also wasn't, you weren't the person saying no. Yeah. And you weren't the person holding the totality of the group and the program accountable. And that was a kind of a shift. Not so much my first year, but as you get going in the profession and you then cycle through a new group, how are you as the head coach building the relationships and the foundations that you previously got away with building as the assistant coach, in our program. So that was some of the stuff maybe I didn't feel like I was prepared to do when I started.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because you always feel like you are the van that nobody wants to get in when you're suddenly the head coach, where before that everyone was climbing into your van. That's funny that you mentioned that, because that's probably the same everywhere. Yeah. Something that I didn't plan for, but I think it's interesting because we're both sitting in a similar seat as coaches and athletic directors. And I think it comes up no matter how hard you try to, be proactive against it. But the optics of, how the sport that you may coach or that I may coach is somehow getting privileged over the others. And I was fortunate enough when I was cutting my teeth to work for a guy named Bill Baxter, that was the longtime athletic director at El Camino and the girls basketball coach, and got to pick his brain a lot. And he did a phenomenal job. And there was still always this, nugget in the back of your head. Well, the girls are getting more, right? Or how are they getting, more attention than the rest of us? And how do you navigate that? And how do you intentionally game plan to make sure, at least in your mind, in the mind of the administration, you can check those boxes to, make sure that everybody is being treated fairly, if not equally, because fair is not equal. It depends on the situation and what's going on at the school at that time, and how things have to operate within the mission of that particular site.
It's tough. Because sports are an emotional thing, and a lot of times, as you know, in your profession, things do get said that aren't true, because it's a perception thing. But unfortunately, sometimes things get said that aren't true, and the people saying it know it's not true, and kind of muddies the waters for people, and it's tough. My advice, or at least my thing, is always try to be myself, but also try to be as honest and transparent with people, and that's really tough in the public school setting, there's a lot of things that you cannot be transparent about. I mean, you can't be transparent about personnel matters.
Right.
There's only so many things you can be transparent about with the finances. I think one of the misconceived things in a public school setting is that, you know, who can control the money. Like, we don't have cash accounts. We don't. There's ASB accounts that are controlled by the students. There's a school budget that's controlled by the principal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, individual coaches don't just have a personal checking account to use
Right.
for sports. And also, you know, another thing that people don't realize, and we try to do the best we can to realize, is different sports cost different amounts of money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not we can't provide for you the same as we provide for others, but the logistics of things is some things cost more. Transportation is more for some sports. Mm-hmm. So whether or not they spend the money or we give them the money, like, there's always this perception of, well, certain sport got more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and a lot of it's based on how many students they have, what are the equipment needs that they have.
Mm-hmm.
But we've done the best we can the last few years to try to get that information out. You know, that was something that we never really had clear protocols on that were posted for the public to see.
Yep.
That we started a student athlete council this last year, and one of the first meetings that we had was to talk about how finances are, mm-hmm. and talk about what officials cost, and talk about where gate revenues go, mm-hmm. because that's never changed. But I think a lot of people have misperceptions of kind of what the money is, because you watch TV shows that say, or you hear about other schools, well, football gets this money and the snack bar goes to this team, where, like, at our school, that's just not the case. But I think a lot of people don't know that. Right. I think a lot of it's just being clear and getting the information out. The more people know, the less assumptions can be made. Right. And that's something we can definitely do a lot better about at our high school. We're trying to get as much information out as we can so people are clear. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how you avoid some of the things, because as I talk to colleagues of mine, they always feel that that's perceived at other places. And I'm in a unique position where I'm also coaching the sport that has that perception at most schools. Right. You know, so that's created conflict at times. But we've done the best we can to be honest about kind of where it goes, and why it goes. You know, we have a snack bar and a gate at our football games, and none of that money goes to the football program. Okay. You know, it goes to other programs, and we're proud to be that mechanism that helps do that. Right. But we're also proud that it goes to sports that can use the money as well.
Yeah, I think that what I've learned is that, you know, you do the best you can and you're as transparent as possible, and it's helpful to have, you know, some people that you're partnering with to make sure you're checking your own blind spots, right? Like, hey, what are the optics on this, mm-hmm. given that I am the coach of this sport, and making sure that there's, you know, the fairness component that we talked about. Now, you mentioned the student athlete council that we were chatting about before we got on the broadcast, and that may or may not fit into what I'm about to ask, but I'd love to hear about it anyway. And so I'm curious, both as the athletic director and institutionally, and as the football coach, you know, what's the best thing you do? What has the largest ripple effect on the culture of your football program, on the culture of your school? Something that's a tangible, you know, we do this, it's a non-negotiable, and this is the impact that it's had.
I think from the athletic department side is something that's been evolving for us. Mm-hmm. You know, alignment is a big word in our programs. Mm-hmm. Being aligned philosophically, and then within your programs, being aligned with the head coach from top down, players being aligned in the beliefs of the individual program. Mm-hmm. But as far as our program goes, my philosophy from the athletic side is we're really trying to put kids in the best position to be successful. And we talk to our coaches about that all the time. And what does that look like? You know, does that mean that they play equally? Not if it's a position where they can't have success. Are there opportunities to get people in there? Is there a way to build the biggest programs that we have and cast the widest net, being inclusive as we can? Mm-hmm. That's the thing I'm most proud of on our campus, is how inclusive our coaches are, and how we sell the message hard that we want kids to play multiple sports. Mm-hmm. And a lot of coaches say it, you know, at some programs, or with a wink and a nod, saying, I really want you to do this. And then they organize a bunch of activities that conflict. But at our school, we've really done a great job of that, and try to identify coaches that do that. And sometimes coaches don't philosophically align with that, and that's okay. And there's no hard feelings, but this is probably not the place for those folks, mm-hmm. Based on what our message is. And I know our principal, Mr. Lyons, when he's come in, I mean, he's huge on building young men and women of character, mm-hmm. And what the C represents for us. When mm-hmm. people see that C, that teams are going to be really organized, they're going to be really competitive, but they're going to try to do it the right way and behave. And that's a lot of times when we have a program that doesn't, or a team that doesn't, mm-hmm. it's too bad, but it's also for us, it stands out.
Right.
And for us, when it stands out, that says we're doing a lot of other things right. And that allows us to then focus on that team and what can we do to help that coach and help those players. That's kind of on the athletic side. The Student Athlete Council has been a way to identify that to our student athletes, to try to get them aligned program to program and see each other face to face and talk about problems and talk about what's working. And are they getting that message from their coach? Are they feeling that way in their program? And that's where
quick, what does that look like, the Student Athlete Council?
So we started last spring. We had 2 representatives from each team, male and female teams. And we started meeting kind of once a month and talking about, first of all, what we're looking for in student athletes, what's working in your program and what's not. What programs do you see on this campus that you say, wow, they're really doing a lot of good things? How are they doing those things and maybe we're not? Or my experience in one sport was this, but then I went to this other sport and God, it wasn't quite that same experience. It wasn't? I didn't know that sitting in my position.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's not working? What do you want to see in an event? What do you like when you go to another event on campus? Are you having issues with officials showing up? Do you feel like students aren't showing up?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Do you feel like you have a big game and nobody knows about it? Like that, we talk about those kind of things. And also, you know, what are you looking for in your teams and what problems are you having in your teams and what's good about your team, and getting those kids to collaborate.
Right.
And also collaborate with someone who can help them, such as myself, dealing with the adults, because most of our coaches are off campus, Justin. I don't know about you guys, but most of ours are off campus. They have busy lives. And they may not be unorganized, but maybe they don't have the same time to donate to the program in the off hours that maybe an on-campus coach may, or somebody with another job has.
Mm-hmm.
And then how can we step in as an athletic department and help with that ordering, or help with the design of those uniforms, or help with getting people to the game, or help with coaching with that paperwork? Like, how can we do that? Because a lot of coaches are prideful and they don't, you may or may not know, they don't want to ask for a lot of help sometimes in this profession. So you're always trying to find ways of, how can I support you so you feel like you're not awkwardly having to reach out for help, but you're comfortable accepting suggestions and help and things like that.
Right. Thanks. And in your football program, what's the best thing you do? Like, if you were to leave and go somewhere else, what would you take with you? That's like, this, we have to do this.
I think it kind of falls under the umbrella of kind of what we believe in our program, and articulating that and identifying that, and then having everything you do fall under that umbrella. So from day one, I've always said we want to have a really organized, hardworking, excuse-free environment where everybody is accountable.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like that was important, that everyone's accountable, coaches, players, support staff, like we're all accountable to each other. We're all responsible for doing that. I grew up in an era of coach is always right, kids are always wrong, you know, and I never wanted to have a program like that.
Right.
And so everything we do, from what we wear on game day, to guys don't have their own pair of socks they wear, that we're looking organized that way, that our pregame warm-up is organized, that we're at office hours every Thursday in the mornings as a football team during the season, working on things when we could be home until 8:30 in the morning, to how we get on the bus to our team meal that cheerleaders and the female student athletes that are involved in sports med eat first.
Mm-hmm.
All those kind of things are kind of under that umbrella, which is not our, behavioral traits we're looking for, or like core values as a football player between the lines.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of governs everything we do, and accountability to those things.
Mm-hmm.
And coaches are just as accountable. We have a tobacco-free campus, so coaches can't show up with chew in their mouth. We don't let our guys wear their hats indoors or their hats backwards. So coaches, we're not on the sideline with our hat backwards.
Mm-hmm.
We're all part of the same thing.
Right.
I think that kind of governs all we do. The single thing that I think helps all of those things within our program and our alignment is we do a lot of practicing together. Right? So we'll practice our JV and our varsity together. So from day one, there's no class system. There's no, you've waited all your time and now you don't have to do anything as a senior, or you're the first in line because you're a senior. We try to treat people as they're all part of this program. And you see in the hallways, the JV guys are talking with the varsity guys. The varsity guys, as we tell them every summer, they got to learn the JV guys' names.
Yep.
You got to get their phone numbers. It's not just, hey kid, hey brown shirt, hey blue hat. Like that's not what we want. And so we make guys go around the weight room and identify everybody's first name, and that's on the player side. And I think as a coach, from a coaching staff side, if I'm going to take it somewhere else, is just alignment of our coaches and giving them job expectations. Like, what do I want from you and what do I not want from you? And exactly what is your role and what is not your role? Mm-hmm. And how do we help that get to our kids? And I think that's something this will probably segue into something else you're going to say, but something I never used to do. I just always took it as, hey, coach, I told you I needed this, and I'm just assuming you're going to do that. As opposed to like, here's what I need, here's what I don't need, and here's what I'm looking for. And then that's what I'm wanting you to get with the players. And that was never always articulated, where you had coaches that could really build trust and build relationships. Mm-hmm. And you had coaches that couldn't.
Right.
And instead of giving the tools to the coach that couldn't,
yeah,
you would always look back and say, oh, I need that coach to coach something else, or I need someone else to coach that position group, where we've taken that approach and really seen coaches prosper and blossom. And we haven't had to have a turnover in coaching staff, and because all coaches really genuinely want to do a good idea, but sometimes older guys are resistant to change, and you got to find ways to chip at that. Mm-hmm. And work with them and let them know it's okay to change.
So to that point, what would you say as, the importance of practicing together, which you mentioned at a school site like yours, where you have 800 to 1,000 kids on any year, depending on the trend line, right? Versus us, where we have 500, and, the interior culture of our school, the kids all know each other just by nature of it being a smaller place, the value that's had, mm-hmm. right? And being able to think about, all right, if I go all the way back to when I started, right? And if I could have a do-over, what advice would I give myself? And what does that look like in a practical standpoint? How do you apply that advice? My first season, as head coach, I was really blessed that we had a core group of third-year seniors, and we had a really good group of impactful sophomores in between, and we had a lot of success. And you kind of took the viewpoint of, is like, hey, I just push these buttons and we go. You dial up this play and it works. We'll just be really creative, and never spent, besides the stuff I was talking about, didn't practice together, mm-hmm. which one of the biggest benefits for our coaches has been JV coaches in a 2-level sport that we have don't feel marginalized. Yeah. JV coaches don't feel, and a lot of times they're not really trying to make stuff up. Mm-hmm. They're in positions where they get asked questions they don't have the answer to a lot. Mm-hmm. And if we've not provided that answer in advance, they try to answer it the best they can to try to show that they're competent in front of the kids. And sometimes they'll do something that might not be what you want. And then they feel like, oh, now I did something that the varsity didn't do, and now I'm doing it the wrong way, where it's allowed our coaches on the lower levels to feel included. It's allowed them to work side by side with their position coach on the varsity when they're in the drills, to ask questions themselves, and to their students has built the trust in their students for their competence. You know what I mean? Their confidence level rose because they're being viewed as a co-expert in that position or in that thing. And that's one of the biggest things with our coaches when we defined it, and we hadn't defined it before, was what we want them to do was have exceptional clarity and build trust. Right. Everything else, and I put together an organizational flow chart, and that was their role. And they all fall equally under the head coach, and they don't oversee any other position. Mm-hmm. They don't, they're not coaching any other position groups. So the running back coach should not be yelling instructions about what the wide receiver needs to do and address him during the game or in practice, to keep it compartmentalized and to do those two things. And I'm a big believer in Brian and Tim Kite. And, I kind of got turned on from them from the Above the Line book. Dan Powers at Pacific Grove shared that book with me a few years back. Mm-hmm. And I remember us talking afterwards going, there's got to be more to this Focus 3. There's got to be more to these guys than this book. And where do we find it? And that was when they were just starting to make a presence on social media. Right. And dove into that, and realized, like, hey, like, some great quotes came from that. Like, if you permit it, you promote it. Yep. If you're not addressing it, you're promoting it happening. And I'm going, wow, how can I fix that? Like, how can I be better at that? And one of the best things that I ever got from them is that when we kind of touched on it earlier, they're not really experiencing your intentions, they're experiencing your behaviors. And so can we clearly identify the behaviors that I want from our coaches to go to our kids, and we only coach them on that, and just catch them doing it right. You know what I mean? So many times coaches want to prove competence. Mm-hmm. And that was the biggest thing with our coaching staff, is they're always wanting, and as a coach, I'm guilty of, you're always trying to prove how much you know. Mm-hmm. And we kind of just made the distinction, like, you're not here to prove to them how much you know. You being organized, mm-hmm.
and you give them the information that's supported by the head coach, that's being echoed by the head coach and supported, is going to build your confidence level. They're going to see you as an extension of the head coach versus giving them different information. So sometimes that kind of cuts at that trust piece that they don't really realize your competency because you're talking about it. And a lot of times it's not really jiving with what other people are saying. And really the other thing with our coaches was talking about the personal trust with student athletes. I went around to our coaching staff and I just said, like, how many of the guys in your group, your student athletes in your position group, do you know how many siblings they have or what their names are? Do you know their parents' names? Do you go to their other sports when they play? And I challenged them to do that. And they quickly realized what a different relationship I now have in my position group that I didn't have before, that I might have had by default with a few of my guys that happen to be more outgoing or happen to have a personality like mine, versus what did they have that they didn't have before, is like, now I know you on a more personal level. And our trust factor is different.
Right.
And I'm not giving you information that's not helping you. I'm keeping it about that. And that's really allowed our coaches to just keep it about that X and O that they need to teach in alignment with what the coach wants and building that relationship with them every day. And our program has continued to soar after doing that. And that's the thing, like, scheme is scheme. I think there's a lot of different things you can do. What are the rules of the school, and when do you offer your summer program, and is there an off-season program? I think all that happens differently everywhere. And you kind of figure that out where you go. But those kind of things is what I would really focus on as a coach from like day one.
Wealth of information there. You mentioned Tim and Brian Kight. I've been consuming those podcasts on my bike rides the last couple of weeks, and anyone should go and check their information out. It's been really helpful for me and obviously for you over the last couple of years. You also mentioned, how are you supporting your athletes in their other endeavors and their family life? And I remember my first year here where I drove to Gonzales to watch a football game, just to show up, be there, support, walk the sideline, and the amount of social capital that gives you in community. Not that it should be a transactional experience, but the fact that you're showing up somewhere that's a little bit out of your way goes a long way to building that trust and that rapport with athletes. And you see it around here a lot because, we're on the same campus and we have advisees playing certain sports and we try to show up. It's just been really helpful. So I appreciate you sharing that. I was thinking about something while you were talking and reflecting on this entire conversation, in that, in essence, you coached baseball at Seaside early on. You then got into Carmel, and you've essentially been there your whole career. What do you do to build network when you don't necessarily have the well-traveled past that others might? How have you continued to stay fresh in your ideas where, there might be a little bit of provincialism just by the nature of geography and your experience?
Yeah, on a personal level, I guess I'll start with was we had someone in our community named Peter Burwash. He lives in Marina now, but still a local guy who runs Peter Burwash International, one of the largest companies in the world when it comes to coaching tennis. And he had been a speaker here at graduation, and he had written me. He's one of those guys that'll write you a nice note. That's his big quote, is catch people doing it right.
Yep. And
he wrote me a nice note in my third year here. And I said, hey, you rarely get those. I really appreciate someone doing that. So I contacted him and said, hey, why don't you, if you're available, come out and watch practice. And he came out and watched practice a few days. And I said, hey, now that you've been here for the game plan all week, do you want to come to King City with us on Friday night? And he said, yeah, sure. Rode the bus down, and it's been a staple in our program as far as a professional looking at me, saying, from his lens of only coaching coaches,
yep,
not telling you, I think you could have thrown the ball there against King City, but more of like, hey, that one time when we got on that guy, the coach needs to follow up, or you need to follow up with something positive. Don't leave him on a negative. There's times where there's frustration, there's times that things happen, but try to catch those guys doing it right. Yeah. They're gonna take that doing it right, and that's gonna really stick with them. If all they hear are corrections, and they are never told good job or what's right, and that's exactly how I want it. So I kind of started with that conversation with him the first night, and he set up a leadership council in our program, and it was just a way for me to reflect and hear other ideas that I can't get from an assistant coach or from an administrator sometimes. And he's been a great sounding board for me over my career. On a football side, you're right. I don't have a lot of people that I've worked under or were mentors for you on the football side. So, I reached out to one of my former college assistant coaches, Paul Gola, who was the head coach at Bakersfield High School.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, like, and I knew him as a GA when I played at University of Redlands, and he was a linebacker coach and really enthusiastic, but a really smart guy and really organized.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew he was taking rosters of 25 guys and winning CIF titles,
mm-hmm.
At Bakersfield High, one of the oldest high schools in the state. And I reached out to him, and he just said, come over. We have a 6 a.m. practice tomorrow morning in Bakersfield. And so I left my house about 2:30 in the morning and drove to Bakersfield and watched their 0 period. And he was kind of an open book with me as far as like, here's what I'm looking for. And he was really big for me he talks about cost. So he always talks about, I said, well, why aren't you doing this or why aren't you doing that? And he says, well, that's too expensive. And I would always say, what does that mean? And he says, I don't have the time during the week to do that. I'm not going to devote 40 minutes of my week to that in practice when I can do 10 minutes of this and 10 minutes of that and 10 minutes of this. And that 30 minutes is much better served. And we may not run things like that or may not practice that. And I take that from a football standpoint. We practice. People see us on special teams, and we're pretty good on special teams. We hardly practice special teams.
Mm-hmm.
We practice them against air.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of times before practice or a 10-minute period. Like, it's the expense of doing that. And so I've taken that as a coach and try to do things that are going to become expensive for other teams to prepare for us.
Right.
And you kind of take that philosophy. So I've kind of had some of people like that I've been able to dig into. And then obviously as you go, Justin, you build relationships with people in your area. A couple of years ago, 2017, I believe it was, Salinas High was on a great run. They were going into the playoffs. They're getting ready for the CCS title game. And I reached out to Coach Zank, who I've known since I was in elementary school. And I just said, hey, would you mind if I came to practice? Like, we're not in the playoffs or anything. And I kind of interested in what you guys are doing. And he said, yeah. He sent me a practice plan. I went over, I watched practice, 3-hour practice. And I saw how are other people doing things, what's working, what's not working. I'm not really big on, a lot of people go to clinics and things like that, and they want to adopt every single thing they see.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm more, at least my management style is that I'm trying to just collect a lot of information,
mm-hmm.
try to better inform myself before I make the call on what I want to do.
Right.
And so that's just a way I've been able to do that. I have people come to practice since my first year. They always, can I come to practice? Come to practice.
Right.
We've had staffs that are in our league, come to practice, come watch us practice. Not that we're doing it right. And I find myself asking them, what do you think? What did you think about that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that was working? And I've had that from coaches in other sports come from other schools. I've had basketball coaches come, and one of the best advice I got from Dan Powers at PG was, hey, when you guys were conditioning, and I've taken this with me from the day he said it, when you guys were conditioning, a lot of coaches took that as a water break. And it was kind of you and one guy running the conditioning for the team versus what if we had them all staggered out there and they're all encouraging those guys and they get their water when the water break is. And so I said, you know what, I never would have seen that. And I love that. We've done that ever since.
Yeah. That's
just
great.
Trying to collect those little bits and pieces that may or may not work for you. But no, not the, I've not been a coach here for 30 years and worked in multiple programs. So my path on that's a little bit different, but just not being afraid. I mean, just with Brian Kite a few years ago, reaching out to him, just saying, hey, would you love to do a workshop at our school? Yep. Just kind of a cold call kind of thing. And he just said, yeah, where are you located? Absolutely. I'll do it right after I'm in Santa Ana. I'll fly up and I'll just tag team it after I go to San Jose State. And I just said, let's do it. And all of a sudden he was here, and so just trying to reach out and find those things and then trying to collect that data and see how that can fit in or not fit into your program.
So I think that's the important part, right? Is that you and I are at rival schools in theory, right? And we talk all the time. I talk to Dan regularly. And, as we get older and mature as coaches, how do we put that rivalry aside and realize that the kids are what's most important and how can we continue to grow? And, that person over there might be the best opportunity for us to grow and to reach into that. I'm gonna end on this question because it's something that I think you're uniquely positioned as the athletic director. And I was talking to one of my good buddies who for this pod a couple of days ago, who's also an athletic director. And what I'm curious about is either in coaching your own children in their youth sports as they get older, right? Watching Coach Powers coach, or going around practice to practice and going out and pick a sport at your site that you've been observing where you saw something and you were like, oh, that's really good. I need to definitely do that with the football team. Anything of that nature that you've learned that has nothing to do with football, but, you saw at these other sports or these other avenues that maybe might not be in the forefront of a young coach's mind. Like, this is an area where I can mine for ideas.
Couple of things. I just look at, in my job, I'm uniquely positioned to watch a lot of practices, and to see what teams are focusing on as a layman, obviously coming in as far as the schematics of a sport and what works and what doesn't work. Watching both of our basketball programs practice and utilizing every single basket we have in there for something related where everybody's going at the same time. And even when you're scrimmaging, it just isn't ones against twos. Like, I love seeing teams that do that. I saw something unique last year with our girls soccer program. Our girls soccer program is going into a playoff game, and our girls soccer program is pretty good, but physically our girls, we don't have a lot of girls 5'10", 5'11", where you go up against some of these teams that have the taller girls. Like, it's a physical brand. And our coach was showing us videos of, like, hey, look at these girls on this other team. And it looked like a boys lacrosse match, watching this team play. And so I went down and watched practice, and there's our coach, who's a former college player, dressed out, playing. There's two of our coaches dressed out, playing. Our coach was going like, how can I mimic this for our team? I'm not going to say we can't do it. We're going to try to be physical and get used to those bigger bodies being out there. And that was something I thought was really, there was some ingenuity there, because so many coaches want to find reasons why when they get in the playoffs, it's not fair. We're playing this school, or this school just has better players than us. It's like, well, how do we attack these people? And so I've watched that. I just watched that this last spring, and I thought, that's really good. I've watched our baseball and softball programs, how they divide up practice and how they utilize specific skills that carry over. And while you can get a lot of things done without the whole team coming together, and get everybody coached. And that's what I like to see, is everybody kind of getting coached. And then something I really took from our longtime boys swim coach, Conrad Kors, who was here forever and had outstanding teams. Early in my career, I was so blessed to be around him. He's so knowledgeable, but from a physical standpoint of, here's where he would come in and we'd talk, and I said, what are you guys doing? I saw the swim sets look different today. And he'd always explain, here's the date on the calendar where we need to peak. Everything we're doing physically is to peak then. It's not about what our times are in the first meet. It's not about whether we scored this many against Stevenson or not in the dual meet of swimming. It's about, what are our times? What do our practices look like? How are we structuring the workouts to peak there? And that's something as a coach where I've really relied heavily on our training staff of, when are we in full gear? When are we out of pads? When are we just in t-shirts and shorts? Because it's all about, here's where we physically want to have the most guys in the best shape they can when the other teams are physically worn out. And that's one of the great things I've taken as a coach. And none of those things are I've probably taken more from non-football practices and non-football teams than football teams. And I love watching sports, and I love watching practices more than I probably love watching games.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And it's such great advice because, again, when you're early in your career, you're just usually not aware of that, not thinking about how you can do that. And I often find myself, I share an office with Cooper, who's our head lacrosse coach, and often find myself looking at lacrosse film and asking why they do certain things, because the game is so similar. But it's fascinating, right? The football coach learns a tremendous lesson from the swim coach, and priceless. So thank you for sharing that. Hey, Golden, thanks for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. I think, this is going to be super helpful for anyone that hears it and is really looking for ways to stay relevant and fresh in their program. And I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Look forward to the other ones you're going to be doing. I'm trying to get something myself.
All right, man. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks.